Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to talk about point guard problems. And if Mike Conley isn't the answer, what is? Because nothing else is working either. So we'll talk about why Mike Conley is still very important to this team. We'll also talk about Wolves Kings tonight. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. You can start your season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Friday, happy game day, happy weekend. It's a big day today as the Wolves try and snap a 3-game losing streak. Minnesota's in Sacramento trying to beat the Kings in Sacramento for the second time this season in as many tries. It's also game 2 of the NBA Cup, so additional ramifications for tonight's game. But really, there doesn't need to be any additional ramifications with how bad the Wolves have played over the last 3 times out, including 2 embarrassing losses in Portland. And today I want to talk about the point guard problems. And a problem that Tim Connolly set out to solve a couple of years ago with Mike Conley and seemed to have a solution that would last for a period of time. Drafted Rob Dillingham, thinking that there'd be a bridge between the two. But what about right now? Like, what happens now? What's the plan, given how bad the point guard play has been overall and how much the offense has struggled, especially over the last week or so? So we'll dive into that today. We'll close with a bit of a Wolves Kings preview. First of all, though, a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show's free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And don't forget about the new daily newsletter. The Locked On Wolves daily newsletter is a one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. All right. So let's start by kind of establishing where the Wolves point guard situation is and why we are where we are. So when Tim Connolly took over this team, D'Angelo Russell was the point guard. And that wasn't going to be long-term tenable. We knew that. Trade deadline of his first season. So, obviously not last season, but the season prior. So what, spring of or February of 22, I guess it would have been? No, 23? I don't know. 22. 23, I guess. Man, it feels longer ago than that. Of course, Tim Connolly pulls off one of the better trades of the last several years for any team, trading D'Angelo Russell for just D'Angelo Russell for Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and getting back a second-round pick. An incredible trade. Mike Conley immediately is helpful for the Wolves. They get I guess that year they ended up in the play-in, but brought an element that they didn't have, that, the kind of lower usage point guard who is also a knockdown 3-point shooter. He's, a better catch and shoot 3-point shooter for his career than D'Angelo Russell. And, more solid and consistent in terms of perimeter defense, not anywhere near the defender he was, back in the day with Memphis, but a player that had been underperforming his last year and a half in Utah after making the All-Star team as a, whatever he was, 33-year-old or whatever. And for the last year and a half, Conley's been fantastic. And last year he was awesome. Like, he was nearly as good as he had been in his All-Star season until the end of the season when he started to wear down, and the playoffs were pretty rough for Mike Conley. And it was a real question of like, hey, and this was, of course, in between, the Wolves gave him an extension. They gave him a 2-year extension, so he's under contract this year. Next year, he's currently, I think he is 37. I think he just turned 37. He turned 37 about a month ago. So this year, next year, the thought was, all right, we get him through his age 38 season. He probably retires. And then this offseason, the Timberwolves traded up using, future draft capital to get Rob Dillingham. And I made the case over the summer, like, hey, look, the plan here is, or the reason that they're doing this is, of course, months prior to the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, was they're going to be completely unable to add anybody in free agency due to their cap constraints. And there's no other way to add guys. You can't add current NBA salaries without trading out big salaries that you already have. Obviously, the Wolves did that in the Towns trade. but your moves are still limited on the trade market. They're non-existent in the free agent market. And so what's the other way to acquire talent? Well, it's finding lottery talented type players. And it's possible, the jury's obviously still out. The Wolves did a good job, but I think some of the guys they've gotten in the second round, from Jalen Clark to Josh Minott to Leonard Miller, like one or two of those guys are going to work out as rotation guys, but none of them likely have the upside to be a superstar. Rob Dillingham does have that upside. And the thought process was obviously, hey, we draft this guy at 8 and he can learn the ropes behind Mike Conley. He'll be our backup point guard this year. I think that was the assumption when he was drafted. He'll be our 8th man. He'll play 12, 14, 16, 18 minutes a game. Mike Conley just last season, averaged 29 minutes a game. In fact, he hasn't averaged less than 28 and a half minutes per game since his rookie season. So the thought was like, look, he'll get 12 to 16 minutes, Dillingham will, and learn the ropes behind Mike Conley this year, learn the ropes next year. Conley retires, Dillingham becomes a starter, and he's still in a rookie scale contract, albeit an expensive one because he's the number 8 overall pick. But that's the plan. Well, then the Timberwolves trade Karl-Anthony Towns. They get back Donte DiVincenzo, and Rob Dillingham's no longer in the rotation because Chris Finch has decided I only need 8 guys in the rotation, which we talked about the other day. I understand why he's doing it. I think we're at the point where that needs to open up a little bit. But Dillingham didn't have to be the backup point guard because the thought was DiVincenzo can do it. Nickeil Alexander-Walker can do it. Anthony Edwards can run the offense. We don't need to play Dillingham because we have these 3 options, and Mike Conley's solid. And Mike Conley can play 25 to 30, 29 plus minutes per game if you look at his track record. Well, we're still only 12 games in. So obvious caveat, 12 games in. That has not worked to plan, and there's multiple reasons for it. First and foremost, Mike Conley has not played well. He's played in 11 games. He's averaging by far his lowest minutes per game, only 23 and a half minutes per game. I said it's 5 minutes less per game than he's played in any season except his rookie year. And his rookie year, he still averaged 26 minutes a game for Memphis. He's averaging by far his lowest points total, by far his worst 3-point percentage. No matter how you slice it and dice it, you can look at assists. Like this is his least amount of assists since the 1920 season, which was injury and COVID shortened. And you go before that, and you go a couple more years to 17-18. Like this, by the way, is his lowest 3-point percentage since 17-18, and it's still lower than it was that year. And actually, you know what? That's the year he played only 12 games because he had the knee issue. So let's throw that one out. So this is the lowest assist year he's ever had. Well, I shouldn't say ever. Going back to 2008, 2009. So everything's down across the board. That's the point. The Wolves have been, not great with Mike Conley on the floor. Now, they haven't been great with him off the floor either. And I want to dive into that a little bit here in a moment. But with Conley on the floor, the Timberwolves are, the offense, it was top 10 before these games in Portland. It's now 12th overall in the league. And Conley himself, there's no confidence with him. The legs aren't there on the shot. He's not trying at all to score off the dribble, which he, of course, didn't do a whole lot of the last couple seasons, but did a little bit of. Mike Conley just hasn't played well. But the problem is, as I've already laid out, this team is designed to rely on him to have at least one more season, if not 2 in him. Like I'm sure the thought was, best case scenario, Mike Conley gets 2 more solid years and he retires, and Dillingham could play progressively more over the next 2 years. Worst case scenario is we get most of another good year, but by the time Conley is, maybe ready to transition into a bench role or a nominal starter who plays less down the stretch or whatever, end of season, playoffs, early part of next year, then Dillingham will be ready. Well, right now, neither thing has happened because it looks like, I'm not saying this is true, it looks like Mike Conley is washed 11, 12 games into the 24-25 season at age 37. Now, we don't have enough of a sample to know that for sure, but it doesn't look good so far. And Rob Dillingham hasn't played. He played his first rotation minutes of the season on Wednesday, and it was, I'll call it decidedly mixed results. I thought he made some good passes. The assist didn't come through because guys didn't make shots, but he got beat off the dribble a couple of times, which is, of course, the primary concern with Dillingham. And then I thought he probably could have played a little bit more in that game, even though it was a mixed bag. But the point is, Conley's neither playing as he needs to, nor is Rob Dillingham ready to assume a role with more minutes. And that's a problem. I want to talk about the other point guard play, like who else is actually, if Rob Dillingham's not the backup point guard, well, who is? And the answer is that 3-headed monster I mentioned earlier, and it hasn't looked pretty. And that'll get us a little bit into DiVincenzo's performance to this point this season as well, which I want to get to too, and then we'll close by talking Wolves Kings. So let's do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25 APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for just $5 per month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right. So, while the Timberwolves have not been good with Mike Conley on the floor, we've established that, they're actually worse with him off the floor. And that's the crazy thing. So, with according to the Basketball Reference on-off numbers, the Timberwolves with Conley on the floor are a plus 1.4 net rating. But with him off the floor, or I should say it this way, they're a minus 2.4. And if you want to take this a layer further, which I'd love to, the minutes with Donte DiVincenzo and Anthony Edwards playing point guard have not been good. And the easiest way to look at this is just look at the off-court numbers on cleaning the glass. I guess there's a couple different ways we could do this. Like, they've been okay with Conley off the floor straight up. That minus 2.4 number I mentioned was wrong. I looked at the wrong thing. Actually, a positive. So they're a plus with them on, they're a plus with them off. Overall, the team, again, is actually better than a 6-6 record. I don't want to get into that. Some of these numbers are going to look better, and just because of the sample size. But if we look at a lineup with Donte DiVincenzo as a point guard, like, just do that on cleaning the glass. Plug in Donte DiVincenzo as point guard. This team's a minus 24.7 net rating. First percentile. Now, it's only about 50 possessions. And DiVincenzo on the floor at point guard means that Ant is off the floor. So that's an important caveat here. So if DiVincenzo's at point guard and Ant's off the floor, this team's a minus 24.7. Okay? DiVincenzo point guard numbers have not been good. If you want to look at Anthony Edwards' point guard minutes, they're going to be better because Anthony Edwards is a better player and, generally speaking, has, like, he's starting to figure out the initiated offense thing. Those numbers are positive. He's a plus 8.1 with him at the point guard spot. But if you straight take Conley off and then the mixture of these guys at point guard, it's not great. And to make matters worse, it's not only Ant either, because Ant has to rest too, right? And obviously Ant's playing too much at this point, and that's part of the problem is he needs to rest more. But if you look at Anthony Edwards and Mike Conley off the floor, it's not pretty. So if there's no Anthony Edwards and no Mike Conley on the floor, this team has 60 possessions in that scenario, and they're a minus 18.3. And it's overwhelmingly DiVincenzo at point guard. There's some possessions in there with Nickeil Alexander-Walker at point guard. And then there's very limited data with Rob Dillingham, and a little bit of that is garbage time. But a minus 18.3 with both Edwards and Conley off the floor. The point to take home here is, first of all, Mike Conley is very important to the Wolves' success because they're banking on it. He needs to be good. And the subhead there is a big reason for that is because there's no reason to believe that Rob Dillingham's ready. The second reason is because Rob Dillingham's not ready, there's no alternative. Like, there isn't a backup point guard. And the Wolves knew this full well going into the season. They got away with it last year. For as bad as Shake Milton was early in the season, they were able to cobble together this Nickeil Alexander-Walker thing and then trade for Monte Morris. But I would underscore the fact that Tim Conley and Chris Finch thought it important enough to have a true backup point guard that they traded for Monte Morris. They didn't have to. They could have kept going with Alexander-Walker and Ant as backup point guards. But they didn't. They said, look, we need a backup point guard. Let's get Monte Morris. And then didn't play him enough. And obviously he was spotty anyway. He shot the three well, but the defense was spotty. And He was maybe a bit higher usage than what I think the Wolves need out of that role. I say that, but of course, Rob Dillingham is going to be a higher usage guy too. My point is, I think Tim Conley, when he drafted Rob Dillingham, was like, all right, this dude's going to play, like it or not, right? And I compared it to the Denver situation last year with Julian Strother and Christian Brown early last year and Zeke Naji and the different guys that ended up having to Peyton Watson that played rotation minutes for Denver early last year out of necessity, and some of them fell out of the rotation as the year went on. Chris Finch is taking the opposite approach. Chris Finch is playing the guys that are going to be in the playoff rotation and not playing the younger guys to try and gain some sort of cohesiveness. Of course, the main difference being Denver had more cohesiveness. I know that they lost Brown and they lost, Jeff Green and stuff from the championship year to last season. But generally speaking, the core players there was more cohesion. Whereas with the Cat trade, there's now less cohesion for Minnesota. And before the Cat trade, I was like, hey, look, 7 of the top 8 rotation guys are the same, or 8 of the top 9. Kyle Anderson was the only guy that was gone. Like, you can work in Dillingham however you want. You can play him early in the season and then phase his minutes out if it's not working, like what Denver did last year. But because of the Cat trade, Chris Finch feels the need to play these guys together as much as he can to gain some sort of cohesion, to gain some sort of familiarity and some confidence in these lineups moving forward. And that means no Rob Dillingham, no Terrence Shannon, no Josh Minot, to a lesser extent, no Joe Ingles, right? Like, there's no rocking the boat here. It's these same 8 guys because he knows those are the 8 guys in the playoffs. But now here we are, 12 games in, and what's the payoff? You're 6-6. You've lost 3 in a row. You don't know anything about Rob Dillingham. You're not confident in your top 8 because they haven't figured it out yet. So it's either they got to figure it out quick or you pull the chute, and now you've lost 12 games. You haven't lost 12 games, but 12 games are gone, and you're 6-6. You're right back where you started, if you want to say that. But the schedule's only about to get tougher, and, they've had good fortune with luck. Knock on wood. The only player that's missed a game was Conley due to rest. Everybody else has been healthy. So I think this was the combination of a shift in front office strategy based on what happened, and I think it was DiVincenzo became available. They said, let's pull the trigger now. Because we think also DiVincenzo can paper over the backup point guard minutes, so we can bring Dillingham along more slowly. But then you have the disconnect because of that. The coach had to shift strategies, and now you don't know what you have in Dillingham. Conley does it. Like, if Conley was playing great, or if DiVincenzo was playing great, and again, DiVincenzo's been okay overall. I know the last couple games have been rough, and rightfully so. There's a bad taste right now with DiVincenzo minutes. But at point guard, as running the offense, he has not been good. The shot selection, the turnovers, the missed lobs to Rudy and forced passes to Randle, like, those have been issues. The defense has actually been spotty too. Now you've kind of, we're 12 games in, so I'm not going to say the Wolves have painted themselves into a corner. That's a little dramatic, but I don't know. What do you know after 3 weeks of basketball? Do we know anything about what this team actually is? I don't know that we do, other than the rotation should probably grow a little bit. They need the energy, the shot in the arm that Josh Minot can provide, and ultimately, they may just need an alternative to Mike Conley. And clearly, so far, they don't feel like it can be Rob Dillingham. And in a painfully small sample, Rob Dillingham has not proven that it should be him either. But he needs more runway. And to me, 3 of the last 4 games against Portland would have been a great opportunity to give some of these guys some run. Now, I know they ended up losing 2 out of 3 anyway, but maybe they don't. If you put these young guys out there that don't know any better, because that's basically who they got beat by, was a Portland team that didn't know any better. It was just playing hard. Some positionless guys, a bunch of bigs, but missing Anthony Simons and missing Robert Williams in the second game and missing DeAndre Ayton for the last 2 games that they lost. I just think it was a missed opportunity. And now you have at Sacramento, you have a tough home game against Phoenix on Sunday, and then you go out on the road again. I just think that this was just a misconnection here with the early season schedule and trying to figure some stuff out. Let's talk about Wolves Kings next. One of the things I want to do next week, and I don't know, one of the things I want to do is look at, like, I guess we'll see how Friday and Sunday go. I mean, if they win both games, maybe it won't feel like this guy is falling on Monday morning, but I want to talk about, like, what has gone as planned and what has not. So, like, for instance, I was worried about Julius Randle replacing Karl-Anthony Towns defensively, but he's been worse than expected so far. He's been just a disaster defensively. That is close to what I expected, but it's worse than I expected, right? Mike Conley's 3-point shooting, the worst in his career through 12 games, through 11 games that he's played, is completely unexpected and has to bounce back to some point, right? Like, so I want to kind of dig through some of those. And part of that is we're 14% through the season now. Like, it's still painfully early. You take any 12-game stretch in the middle of last season and you could probably find some weird numbers. So we have to keep that in mind as well and not completely overreact. All right, let's talk about Wolves Kings next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Wolves game on Friday night, late game at Sacramento. Minnesota is still favored by 1.5. Okay, think about that. 1.5 favored for Minnesota. A little bit surprising. We'll talk through, who's available, who's not available for both teams here in a moment. But Wolves are favored by 1.5 on the road at Sacramento this evening. Also, big NFL game Thursday night ended up being a pretty fun one between Philadelphia and Washington. And, I've talked about this before. I love betting individual games that are, when there's just a Thursday night game or a Monday night game or whatever. I think that's a ton of fun. All that to say, big weekend ahead in college football, and then also, of course, NFL on Sunday. But go check out Wolves -1.5 at Sacramento tonight. At FanDuel, visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Wolves Kings tonight. These teams, of course, faced off in the Timberwolves' second game of the season. It was the Kings' home opener back on October 24th. That was a 2-point Minnesota win. Julius Randle played awesome in his first good performance as a Timberwolf. Remember, he had a rough game in LA 2 nights prior. Anthony Edwards was really good in that game as well. Let's see. Ant had 32 on 24 shots, 5 of 15 from 3, got to the line 7 times. That would be nice to have in this game as well. 7 rebounds, 4 assists for Ant in that game. Naz was great off the bench, 19 and 13. Julius Randle had 33. Just a really well-rounded game. Like, Rudy was kind of the only guy that didn't play exceedingly well. I guess Mike Conley didn't play great. And of course, that was still the early season Jaden problems, but good bench contributions, solid performances across the board. And the Wolves did a pretty good job defensively on the De'Aaron Fox, DeMar DeRozan combo in the backcourt. DeMar DeRozan is probably not going to play Friday night, which explains a little bit the 1.5 point favored for Minnesota. I would still favor, like, if I were setting the line for this, I would have guessed it was Kings by 1, Kings by 1.5. Even without, like, if I didn't know DeRozan wasn't playing, I would have said that. But I think even no DeRozan, I still probably would lean towards Sacramento being favored in this game. I just like the vibes, and I guess maybe I'm too plugged into the vibes with the Wolves. But he left the game against the Suns the other night, played only 17 minutes on Wednesday, and is officially day-to-day, but I think he's listed as doubtful for Friday. So he's probably not going to play for the Kings, which is a huge deal. DeRozan always plays well against Minnesota. The last couple of years with the Bulls gave the Wolves all they could handle. I think beat the Wolves twice last year, and DeRozan was a huge part of that. He got to the line 14 times in the first matchup this year between the Wolves and the Kings. In that game, by the way, the Wolves won by 2. Sacramento had 35 free throw attempts. The Wolves only had 17. Okay, Sacramento made 13 more free throws than Minnesota, but the Wolves made 9 more threes. They attempted 21 more threes. So the Wolves had 27 more points on three-pointers, and the Kings had 13 more points at the line. Obviously, 3's more than 1. So the math worked out in the Wolves' favor. But this was, it was another game, 16 turnovers for Minnesota. The same kind of glaring issues were there again. And so, like, I don't know if you're talking keys to the game, just generally speaking, they just can't turn it over to the extent that they've been turning it over. That's first and foremost the biggest thing. And that was less of a deal in the last Portland loss. Remember the first Portland loss, It was all about turnovers on Tuesday. And Wednesday, it was all about just missing open shots and just not being able to pick themselves up off the mat. Just basically giving up in all these different scenarios that happened throughout the game. Lack of hustle, losing 50-50 balls, and then missing open shots. But it's kind of the combination of all of these things that are so alarming. I should also mention Malik Monk is out. He sprained his ankle last week. He, runner-up sixth man of the year last year behind Reid. He had 17 points off the bench in the first game between these two. So between no Monk and no DeRozan, I guess it makes sense the Wolves are favored. I still Sacramento's a difficult matchup for Minnesota. And I've said this many times before. I said it leading into the season. De'Aaron Fox being such a tough cover, and then Sabonis is such a talented big, is a very different type of big than the three bigs the Wolves have. Like all four of those guys, if you want to line up, Randle, Nas, Gobert, and Sabonis, they're all very different from one another. And Sabonis has always presented a difficult cover for Minnesota. If Randle can be physical enough with him, they can throw him. He had 4 turnovers. Sabonis did in the first game between these two teams. Almost half of the Kings' total turnovers as a team. They can force him into kind of the overpassing because he's such a good passer, but he only had 1 assist to 4 turnovers in that first matchup. They have to really kind of lean on that a little bit. So that would be key number 1 is take care of the basketball. I shouldn't have to say make open shots, so I'm not going to say that because, again, if they'd done that against Portland, they still would have won that game despite all the other issues. Number 2 would be try and make Sabonis into a playmaker by being physical with him. Try and force him into some difficult passes. And then the third thing, if you look at, I'm going to pull up the actual Sacramento numbers so far this year in terms of their pace of play and rebounding and stuff. So their pace right now, they're only 13th, which I wasn't necessarily expecting, but they're a pretty solid defensive rebounding team. Minnesota's not going to get a lot of chances on the glass. Sabonis is a good rebounder. But the key is going to be forcing them into difficult shots offensively. They're not a great 3-point shooting team, but points in the paint, like that has been an issue against Sacramento in the past. Like going back to that first Sacramento game, I think I lost it here. Oh, there we go. Let me pull up the points in the paint. But that, of course, has been another theme early this season is protecting the paint. Rudy did not play well in those 2 games in Portland, and he's got to play better in this game. In the first game, Sacramento was a +8 points in the paint. Wolves were -8 points in the paint. So Rudy's got to protect the paint against Sabonis and others. And the Wolves have to take advantage of no Malik Monk and likely no DeMar DeRozan as well. Those are the biggest things in this game. It's just not a great matchup for Minnesota, and it's a tough spot to try and snap out of this funk that they're in. Talk about Sacramento's schedule overall. They've been alternating wins and losses for a little while now. They lost their first 2 games of the year, then they won 3 straight against inferior teams. They beat Portland easily, they beat Utah easily, and they beat Atlanta. Then they lost in overtime to Toronto. They beat Miami by a single point in a game that I believe, Jimmy Butler played in that game. They beat Toronto again. So they've beaten Toronto twice. They've beaten Utah. They've beaten Portland. And they've won in overtime over Phoenix. And then they actually beat Phoenix last time out too, pretty easily, but of course, no Kevin Durant. So the Kings are 7-6, but I would say it's an even, I don't want to say a fake 7-6, but it's a softer 7-6 than the Wolves 6-6, in my opinion. And we can look at the Western Conference standings, and the Kings actually do have a better point differential than Minnesota. But given the competition they've beaten and some of the teams that they've faced missing key players, I mean, they're actually in similar spots. The difference is the Kings have more injuries. The Kings get to play at home again. The Wolves are kind of the Kings are coming off of this big win over Phoenix, and the Wolves are in the doldrums after 3 consecutive losses. So for me, it's like De'Aaron Fox is the one guy you got to worry about. So protecting the paint against Fox, starting with the point of attack, Rudy protecting the paint against him, and limiting offensive rebound opportunities for Sabonis and others, and just don't turn the ball over offensively. Given the shorthanded Kings, this game in my mind is really close to a toss-up, honestly. Make sure to tune into the Locked On Sports Minnesota channel on YouTube following the game. We'll have the live postcast with, I believe, Luke Inman and Jack Borman tonight. And then I'll be back on Monday after Wolves Phoenix. There's a matinee at Target Center on Sunday. And on Monday, we'll be the postgame pod following Phoenix, Minnesota on Sunday. And then we'll get into some of the other, like, this has gone as expected and this hasn't next week, as I talked about earlier. So we'll do that early on next week as well. All right, that's all I have for you today here on the show. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, Locked On Wolves now has a daily newsletter. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage. Please subscribe. Sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. You can start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.